Welcome on in, everyone. My name is Max Goodman. I'm alongside Tim Hackett, and this is a very much anticipated debut for you guys at home. Welcome on into GoodHacks, a Northwestern-based Major League Baseball podcast. And I'm going to slide it on over to Tim because what we want to do in our first podcast right now is give you a little hint about what's going to come, what we're going to be doing, and we're going to dive into a National League divisional breakdown now that the 2019 MLB season is almost about a month underway, Tim, and there's a lot that's been happening. But first, before we get into that good stuff, tell me a little bit about what's going to be happening on GoodHacks moving forward.
We've got big plans for this show. We're going to have a weekly podcast where we break down all the happenings across Major League Baseball, maybe dip into some minor leagues and some other types of baseball across this great country of ours. And also we're going to be supplementing that with a couple, maybe a bi-monthly studio show where we can break down visually some things that are going on and present some of our ideas to you in a different way. But we're really excited to get this going. We've been planning this for quite some time, and I think we've got some really good content coming your way.
And this is not your everyday podcast. This is something that Tim and I have been working on for a while, and we're just two buddies talking about baseball. So if you have any topics that you want us to talk about, to debate, to come up with further questions, please reach out. Please DM us. We're gonna have a Twitter account. We're gonna have a YouTube, a SoundCloud. You'll find ways to be able to reach us, and we just love talking about baseball. So any topics that you think that we should dive into, we are totally all ears.
Feel free to like and subscribe.
Ring those bells. So Tim, we are, I'd say, about 3 weeks into the Major League Baseball season, and a lot has happened so far. But we are in Chicago, and so we want to start with a National League Central divisional breakdown. And a lot happened in this offseason, but I know you have some ties to the St. Louis Cardinals. It's been a team that you've been following for some years now. And one of the biggest trades of the offseason was securing, honestly, the best first baseman in the bigs, I think, in Paul Goldschmidt from the Arizona Diamondbacks. And maybe he hasn't statistically been the best first baseman in baseball thus far this year, but the Cardinals have been a fun team to watch, especially with a couple early April series with the Milwaukee Brewers, two teams that we think are going to be right at the top of that division at the end of this year. So how has that deal for Goldschmidt paid off for the Cardinals so far? Do you think that it's going to be able to give them that push to dethrone the Brewers at the top of this division?
I think if you looked at the Cardinals, that was the position that they were lacking in, I guess, coming into just the last couple of seasons, what's maybe kept them from being that ultimate contender. And obviously the last person that has really held that mantle of the Cardinals first baseman was Albert Pujols. They haven't had a player like that in quite some time.
Well, it was Matt Adams.
Right.
And then they've had Carpenter over there.
Carpenter is a guy that can play a bunch of different positions, but they've moved him over to first base because they had some other guys that they wanted to play at third. So Carpenter used to be a second baseman, has played third in the past, has played a little bit of outfield here and there. Yeah, he was the first baseman for the last year or two, but now they have a true first baseman, your more prototypical guy at that position. Like you said, quite probably the very best at that position in the game. You could argue for Freddie Freeman after the season he had last year, but generally, I do think that Goldschmidt would be a great candidate for that. So regardless of if he's number one or number three among league first basemen, that gives you a legitimate player at that position to move Matt Carpenter elsewhere, to keep some other guys in the lineup, add in some of your younger guys like a Paul DeYoung and a Harrison Bader around the team, guys that you expect to be cornerstones for the team going forward. So that appeared to be the position that was lacking. And yeah, Matt Adams had a couple of good years for them, was a good home run hitter, but Goldschmidt can do a whole lot more than that. He can do a whole lot more than what Alan Craig used to do, things that. He just retired officially. So
that's a throwback right there.
Happy trails to Alan Craig. Obviously, wish him the best. But this is a game changing, a team changing type of player, and
Absolutely.
that is why you had to pull the trigger. Even though you gave up a good amount, you're always going to have to give up a good amount. A good young pitcher in Luke Weaver, a guy that I liked quite a bit. I liked Weaver and Flaherty as kind of the anchors of the rotation going forward, adding in a top prospect like Alex Reyes when he can finally get healthy. But you got to give up a player like that to get somebody like Goldschmidt back.
It's a move you got to make, and they are deep pitching wise.
Yeah.
Waka is experienced, Michael Waka, and you mentioned Flaherty. I haven't seen too much of his stuff so far, but he is young, so I think his upside is really high. Martinez, he's been kind of hurt so far, and Wainwright's still there,
Sure
and
is.
he's that veteran presence like Yadi Molina. You know, they have two guys that have been through so much. I mean, Molina's almost been in the league for like 20 years now.
He debuted in 04
which is insane. That's like the majority of our lifetime.
Yeah, no kidding.
Really quick to backtrack, Goldschmidt is hitting .239 thus far, which, you know, you may think, well, Tim, you're crazy that, you know, you're saying this was such an important deal for them. But 7 home runs, and he had that 3 home run day against the Brewers early on, which I think is a good segue onto the Brewers, because while Goldschmidt had his 3 home run day, Christian Yelich, the reigning National League MVP, also has had a 3 home run day against the St. Louis Cardinals. And Yelich has 10 home runs on the year, which I honestly think has kind of flown a little bit under the radar. While everyone's been looking at Cody Bellinger out in LA, which we'll get to, Yelich has been absolutely raking. And I'm a fantasy baseball guy. He has just been racking up the points for me. So
that's what really matters.
That's exactly what matters. The Brewers didn't make too many offseason deals. They got Yasmani Grandal to shore up a catcher position that I guess maybe was a little bit of a weak spot for them. Manny Pena is still a very solid backup. And Eric Kratz, I think, has moved on to a different team. Yeah. So, I mean, Tim, to me, I think that this is still the team that's going to win the division. Their pitching, you know, Corbin Burns has had a lot of tough starts thus far in 2019. He's their touted prospect. Same with Freddie Peralta. He got roughed up last week. But I think if they're able to make one deal, and this is obviously getting way ahead of ourselves with a trade deadline or a waiver deadline, but I really think that they're right there. And that bullpen, Tim, is something special. I mean, Josh Hader is the best reliever in the game. And, you know, right now with a .9 ERA in 10 innings pitched and 18 strikeouts to go along with Jeremy Jeffress coming back from injury and Javi Guerra. I mean, they have a lot of arms in the bullpen, and I think they're definitely a team to watch.
I think that's how you have to build this team, and that's what we've seen out of them in years past. Now, Corey Knebel is out for the year with Tommy John.
Yeah.
That's the issue, but so you don't have that third bullpen guy to supplement Jeffress and Hader, in my opinion. But so, you know, when the Royals were in back-to-back World Series, they had 3 bullpen arms. So if you could somehow get your starter through 5, you liked your chances to have your bullpen get you through the rest of the game. So
whether the Yankees are so close.
That's why, because if you tee those guys up, and you know, with Betances and Chapman now, absolutely, you've got a great shot. And they always have had a couple of other guys in the mix. David Robertson in the past, I guess, to maybe get you the 7th, not anymore. But anyway, the biggest issue, and this was their issue all last year, as you know, was their starting pitching. So they don't really have too many reliable starters. Last year, Julius Chassin was their ace in the postseason. He was their first game of the series starter, which was an absolute shock to me. If you flash back to his days with the Rockies, he was barely a number 2 or number 3 behind Ubaldo Jimenez and De La Rosa. So, I mean, that was a surprise to me, but I was happy for him that he was able to carve himself back into a position like that. But, I mean, this year it's been Zach Davies, who's had 4 good starts for the Brewers, and past that, not really anybody else.
They're still waiting for Jimmy Nelson, and he was hurt pretty much all of last year. And Brandon Woodruff, he had the exciting homer against Kershaw in the playoffs last year. So it's really cool to see some of these names on this roster getting some playing time and doing pretty well. They're not at the top of the division yet. Interesting that the Pirates are currently at the top of the division as of Thursday night. And another team that we can now take a look at is the Chicago Cubs on the north side. And when you talk about pitching staffs, to me, I think that the Chicago Cubs have a lot of names that if you were looking at this team in 2015,
Right, yeah.
they would be the best pitching staff in baseball by far.
Sure.
Cole Hamels, Jose Quintana, John Lester, and of course Yu Darvish. Those are guys that are now hurt, getting older, and I think past their prime. And so they're currently in fourth in the division, I believe. And their schedule has been, nothing special so far. They just swept the Marlins down in Miami, which is by no means impressive. Tim, do you think that they have enough to contend towards the end? I know that they had a really quick exit at the end of last year, and they failed to capitalize on those two home games, game 163, and then that wild card game against the Rockies and the Brewers, and they couldn't capitalize. They had the opportunity, it was right there, and they just couldn't do it. But they didn't really get that much better this offseason.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly concerning.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of projections going into the season that the Cubs might even finish last in the division, which was baffling to me, but it seems like people might have been onto something.
Yeah.
It's not been a very good start. Now, obviously, about 15 games in, there are only so many conclusions that you can draw. They've played 17 games. Every team has played at least 15. But you can't really draw a whole lot of conclusions about individual stats until you get to a certain threshold in terms of projections, but records are pretty much indicative, even at this point of the season, about 10% of the way in a 162-game league. Records are pretty indicative of how a team will finish. So we'll talk about some other teams, but if you've got a really bad record 16 or so games in, you have next to no chance of making the playoffs. Now, there are, of course, a couple of anomalies over the last 15 or 20 years, but obviously if you start 4-12 or worse than that, then your chances of sneaking into the playoffs are low. So the Cubs at 8-9, very much not out of the picture, even though the rest of the division has been solid so far with maybe some room for improvement, some younger teams, whatever. So, I mean, it's too soon to pull the plug for sure because you have all those veterans that you would like to think, guys that have had success in the past. I mean, look at John Lester, prime example. Yu Darvish was great for a few years. So these are guys that you would like to be able to rely on to take a team back to the postseason. But, I think you just kind of outlined some of the other teams in the division might be deeper offensively.
Yeah.
Which is surprising when you look at the season that Javier Baez had last year, and of course you mix in their mainstays Rizzo and Bryant's, throwing a guy like Wilson Contreras. But so then if you have the other guys, the other contributors finally step up, Kyle Schwarber's been dormant to start the season. Really heard anything out of Ian Happ. So if you get these,
he started in the minors,
right? So
he started the season in the minors,
which is a surprise.
Yeah.
And then you've got David Bote. So
and Almora.
And Almora is a good,
pretty much the everyday center fielder.
He's a good defender. So I mean, I don't know. It's a dodgy team, I think, to say the least.
And you mentioned their depth, their bullpen. Since the days when they had Chapman, which was huge in their World Series year, is Pedro Strop really going to win you some games down the stretch?
And they brought in Brad Brock, who is, I think, a good pitcher and was kind of an under-the-radar acquisition, I guess, to try to be that, back-end guy. Maybe not a closer, though they haven't really had 4 save chances all season so far, and he's not been the guy.
But Carl Edwards Jr. has a 32.40 ERA right now.
Yeah.
And this is a team that I think needs to pull the trigger on a Kimbrel, now, if not soon. And the upside for their pitching staff, sure. You could say Darvish stays healthy, pulls it together, 15 wins. They have the offensive firepower to carry a pitching staff and win some games 10-7. But I think that once these starters get taken out of the game, since they are older than a younger pitching staff, they're not going to be able to pitch a 9-inning game, especially in this day and age. So when you don't have that go-to reliever like the Brewers have, and like the Cardinals have, that might be the deciding factor in this division. Would you rather face a Jordan Hicks and an Andrew Miller? Would you rather face a Josh Hader and a Jeremy Jeffress? Or would you rather face Steve Cishek and Pedro Strop?
That's a great point.
I would definitely take the third option.
I think that's absolutely the point here, is that you have a veteran pitching staff, which to me is always something that I like to look for in a team. So they have the names, like you said, and if you imagine that most of them are going to get it together, I still don't think that the league as a whole has seen Jose Quintana at his best, because he started his career with the White Sox and nobody really got to see him be that ace of the staff. So he went north side a year or two ago, and I thought that was going to finally be his coming out party, if you will. Hasn't really materialized for him so far, but I still think he can be a guy that, on this team might even be a number 3, but that's a great spot for him. So if he can actually develop, if Darvish can get healthy, he was out pretty much all of last season with injury. So if they can get their starters into a good shape, you think the Cubs can compete for 6 or 7 innings, but going to the bullpen, it's not been good so far. There's really not a whole lot of bright spots, and like the other 2 teams that we talked about, though there are a bunch of bright spots, guys that you can rely on. Now, of course, the issue is you're going to wear Josh Hader out at this point in the season.
Right, that's a really good point. It's good for them that Jeffers is back. He pitched for the first time, I believe it was 2 days ago. It might have been last night. And with all of this being said about the Cubs, Tim, there's something about the friendly confines, and you can never count this team out. But as for Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, you really can't expect too much from them. Cincinnati's currently in the cellar right now. They got Puig and they got Kemp, and that's been fun. That brawl that Puig took on the entire state of Pennsylvania in that one really famous picture. They're a fun team, Cincinnati. Their offense in a really small hitter's park could lead to some really big games. Joey Votto, such a high IQ in the batter's box.
We forgot about him talking about best first baseman in
the
league,
that's true.
I guess.
Yeah, we got to give him some love. Scooter Gennett's been hurt, and he was really close to winning the batting title last year. Go back to fantasy baseball. He carried my batting average last year. Eugenio Suarez.
Yeah.
They got, I believe they have Jose Iglesias now.
Yep.
They got some good names. And again, the ballpark, the balls fly out of there in Cincinnati. But that pitching staff, to me, is by no means enough to carry them through this division, which I think is one of the strongest divisions in all of baseball. And we'll get to, the AL East and some other NL divisions later. And, how about that? We'll segue on to a team that is really at the forefront of all of baseball, thanks to Cody Bellinger. And we'll go to the NL West. And we'll start with the Dodgers, because they've been one of the hotter teams in all of baseball right now, despite the fact that Clayton Kershaw has been hurt. But what have you seen from Cody Bellinger so far? I don't know how many Dodger games you've watched, but he's been absolutely launching balls there.
Yeah, his start to the season is absolutely magnificent. You mentioned Yelich. I mean, it's between him and Bellinger right now for MVP of the first month. And I really like what Major League Baseball does, and a couple of other leagues have started to do this recently too. But you have hitters and pitchers of the week and hitters and pitchers of the month. So, I mean, the end of April, we're halfway through. It's going to come down to Yelich and Bellinger for April hitter of the month. Now, obviously, they don't really care, and I don't even know that you get any sort of placards or anything like that if you're named a league pitcher or hitter of the month. But obviously you'd rather have a World Series if you're the Dodgers. But I still think it's this race, I guess, at this early season is fascinating. Cody Bellinger was 3 of his first 9, and since then he hasn't hit below 410. He's been he's been so consistent all season, even in this small-ish sample size. But, I mean, just every baseline statistic speaks for itself. And obviously, you hit the top and you've got 10 home runs, 27 RBIs. Those are both first in the league, which is just, I mean, you can't really say enough about him, especially because you knew, even just using last year, Yelich was the MVP last year. So you would hope that he would be able to give you something else like that again. Obviously, you've been hip to Christian Yelich for a little while, so I got to give you some credit there. He was great all last season, no doubt about it. But Bellinger wasn't. He was hurt for almost all season.
After his rookie year, when he kind of burst on the scene,
yes,
he hasn't been anything
very much
special.
a sophomore slump. Then obviously Corey Seager was the guy that was out for all season, not Bellinger. But Bellinger was really much a sophomore slump type of season. Now he's back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, is he going to stay with a .432 average all season? No. But, I mean, it's I mean, I can't really say enough besides he's just been fantastic. If you dip into a couple of deeper advanced stats that I still don't have 100% read on necessarily, those reflect positively on him as well.
Yeah.
So, you've got the baseline stats and you've got the sabermetric stats. They both tell you that Cody Bellinger has had a great start to the season, and numbers like that usually hold up. So he's not going to bat 430 at the end of the season, but he might be in the mix for a batting title, which is amazing.
Yeah. We mentioned Kemp and Puig going to Cincinnati, and I think that for the Dodgers, it's been a little bit of an addition by subtraction. By taking Puig and Kemp out of the lineup, that opened up a spot for AJ Pollock, who they got, and we don't even need to give the Diamondbacks too much time as they're entering a rebuild now that Goldschmidt and Pollock are both gone. But that also gives a lot more time to Alex Verdugo and some other prospects that they have coming up. But, before we went live, Tim and I were talking about how the Dodgers are kind of like the Rays in the sense that they have a lot of guys who play a lot of different positions. And you go into a series and maybe Kike Hernandez starts at second, Chris Taylor's playing left. By the end of the series, everybody's going to be jumbled.
Yeah.
Muncy, Bellinger, they all play first. There's so many different lineup combinations that Dave Roberts can go with, and I think that's going to be really fun to watch because come October, they've been a team that hasn't been able to seal the deal either. We talked about the Cubs, not being able to capitalize on opportunities. The Dodgers have lost back-to-back World Series.
Sure.
So, is AJ Pollock and a breakout year from Bellinger going to be enough to push them over that line? I don't know. It's really early. I like what I've seen from Walker Buehler, and it's really promising that Kershaw's coming back. I don't know what to expect from him just yet. And their bullpen is something to keep an eye on, too. Kenley Jansen has been one of the best closers in baseball for years, but Tim, the rest of their bullpen isn't anything spectacular.
Hold on a second, because yes, they don't really have any other big names to help get you to Kenley Jansen, but they have had a couple of guys that have been up and down from AAA over the last couple of years, guys that I actually know, and if you stick with us on this podcast, you'll hear me talk about this a little bit. A couple of guys that had some success in the minor leagues with the Durham Bulls are now up with the Dodgers. So I think this is not a coincidence that you have some guys that have some Rays connections. Now, obviously, Andrew Friedman has been with the Dodgers longer ago than these guys were with the Bulls, which are the Rays AAA team. But
Right.
Dylan Floro was a former starter with the Bulls, and they moved him into a long relief guy, and now they have him as kind of a setup guy. And now he's been with the Dodger system the last couple of years, and he hasn't allowed an earned run over his first 10 innings pitched.
Wow.
Jamie Schultz was off to a really good start in AAA. He's a former starter as well. He hasn't allowed an earned run over his first 3 innings. So that's a very small sample size for sure for Schultz, but these are 2 former AAA starters who have now found more of a role as, I don't know, really 6th, 7th inning guys for the Dodgers as they try to help the rest of this young pitching staff get in. Because look at who else they have. Ross Stripling, Julio Urias, and Walker Buehler, who is somebody that I've been hip to for a little while.
Yeah.
And yet last year, people saying Walker Buehler is going to be the next great Dodger pitcher, that wasn't a hot take at all. A lot of other people were finally onto that narrative.
Vanderbilt product.
And
so makes sense.
He absolutely. So people that had followed college closer than we did probably were, wise to him a little bit earlier, but I loved what I saw from Walker Buehler, and as long as he can stay healthy, I think he absolutely is going to be the next great Dodger pitcher. So having Kershaw in as really, honestly, it's tough to say this, but as your number 2, if all goes well, if Buehler can be that guy, then Julio Urias was their top pitching prospect for a couple of years, so you expected him to be at the top of the rotation, but I think Buehler has kind of supplanted him. So obviously Kershaw won't be around forever. So if looking very far down the line, if you have Buehler, Urias, and Ross Stripling as your 1, 2, 3, that is
It's not bad at all. That's a good spot to be in.
That's great.
And it'll be very interesting to see what the Dodgers do with Kershaw. We've seen so many extensions in the last couple weeks, even during the season. And we'll get to the young guns down in Atlanta in a second, but Kershaw's probably anxious to ink something.
Sure.
I know that he's had some big deals in the past, but I think he's got to get into a groove. He's got to come back onto the field. I think that his first start, has he started yet?
He has one.
He did.
Okay,
Okay.
1 start,
and
it was good.
He pitched well, 7 innings, 5 hits, 2 runs. That's good to see.
Absolutely, great.
6 strikeouts. I don't know which team that was against, which would be pretty telling, but Tim's going to look that up for us. The internet is a beautiful thing,
It is a
folks.
boon for It's a boon for
Oh,
our
versus
purposes.
Cincinnati. Okay, so we'll see what he does once he faces a Milwaukee, a Philly. We'll see. What other teams in the West can we talk about?
Well, I mean, the big storyline, I guess, for the division was obviously the Dodgers are the team to beat. They have been. That's kind of always the narrative. Even when the Giants were good, that was always how it was posed as, yeah, all right, the Giants are decent, but can they beat the Dodgers? That's just kind of how it goes when you've got the payroll and the expectations and the legacy that the Dodgers have. And obviously, can't really expect too much from the Giants this year. They have a lot of question marks. They have their two mainstays back, maybe healthy, and Bumgarner and Buster Posey. The storyline now is that Bumgarner might get traded, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if the Giants really think that they're going to be out of contention for a little while and now want to hold over until you get a guy like Joey Bart into the majors, maybe even in just a couple of years. This is a number 2 overall pick. I think 2 years ago now, 2 full summers ago, and people are looking at an ETA for Bart for maybe 2 seasons, which is crazy to me. That would be a very fast ascension for a catcher.
Yeah.
So that is a position that always takes maybe even the longest to develop in all of baseball. If you have a hot-hitting first baseman and you can slot him in there, if you have a DH spot, then yeah, all right. If you need a corner outfielder like Alex Verdugo, then all right. But Bart can come up in a couple of years as a catcher, but that's way down the line.
Well, you mentioned Bart, but Buster Posey has been ice cold this year. He's hitting under 200 in 17 games. I'm sure that there are some injuries. He's an older guy, but it might be time to move on. And I think one of the most interesting moves that we've seen so far is the Giants trading for Pilar from Toronto. This is not a division, in my opinion, that they're going to win. So I know that they kind of went all in with going out and getting Longoria a couple of years ago and McCutchen. But now it might be time just to start to play for when Bart is going to be in his prime, if that is their cornerstone from their farm system. I don't know San Francisco's farm system too well.
It's uprooted a lot because of all of those trades that you just mentioned. I mean, they got rid of Christian Arroyo to the Rays for that Longoria trade. That was the big one, I guess. Matt Duffy was traded to the Rays a little bit before that. Now, he was more than just a prospect, but they've uprooted that farm system because of all of those years of contention, I guess. But that's kind of how that goes.
Yeah, and Steven Duggar's been up. Pudge Rodriguez's son, Derek Rodriguez.
I was big on him coming into the season.
He was a Rookie of the Year candidate last year.
Absolutely. I think he was very much a Rookie of the Year candidate. Hasn't materialized super well, but he's definitely balanced, I think, a little bit of late. But, yeah, I mean, the starting pitching has not been great.
Right, and I think that with that being said, Bumgarner could be a tremendous asset for a team trying to make the playoffs.
I mean, that could be... Yeah, I don't mind saying this at this early in the season. If they trade Bumgarner, that could very well be the biggest acquisition. I think people are, to use the common parlance, I think people are sleeping on Madison Bumgarner.
Yeah.
Which is nuts to me. Do we not remember what this guy can do? Because he was just poor last year. Yeah, obviously, I concede that, no doubt. But if they trade him, you're looking at a number 1 pitcher.
Yeah.
Maybe. So obviously, depending on where you go, if I don't want to make up a destination, but if he goes to the Brewers, which was the kind of the storyline,
I think that makes a lot of sense.
He's a number 1 pitcher,
right?
That is no doubt to me, and that gives you finally a guy that you can trust in any series. World Series doesn't matter.
You can trust him in any situation.
We saw that when they won the World Series. He pitched the 9th inning.
It's not just in an even year situation. I think that he is the epitome of a workhorse.
Yeah.
What we saw from Nathan Eovaldi last year, pitching 7 innings in relief, I would not put it past Bumgarner to be able to do the exact same thing.
I think that's
if he needed to get a win.
Great example.
He would do exactly what he needed to do. He's really what you want from a manager in a number 1. But if he went to a team where he was a number 3 because of the other talent on a roster, that's definitely something that could push you over the edge. And you could even use him in a hybrid role, kind of what the Red Sox used, how the Red Sox used Eovaldi last year. Maybe you have so much talent with your starting pitchers that he comes in and he's just a Josh Hader on steroids, and he just pitches 5 innings in relief whenever you need, with the way that this starters go 4 and relievers pitch the rest of the way, or maybe he's an opener.
That's the thing, right? That's the other development. We'll talk about this more when we talk about the American League later, but that is a thing that other teams have started to use. The Dodgers have used it once or twice with limited success, I guess, but teams are starting to use the quote-unquote opener if you have to. So, yeah, I mean, if the Brewers have to rely on their bullpen to get you through a game, let's take the Brewers out of the situation. If another team has to use a quote-unquote reliever to get you through the beginning, and then that puts you in a position to use a guy like Bumgarner for 6 in the middle of the game, I absolutely don't see why you wouldn't.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that he rakes.
No kidding. He can hit. This is another thing that I think people kind of forget, but not really. I mean, you look at some of these guys, like kind of the preeminent National League pitchers for the last couple of years. Kershaw can hit.
Greinke can hit really well, too.
Greinke hit
Yeah.
2 home runs in a game, or actually that's not true, but he hit 2 home runs in a week earlier this season.
Okay.
And then Bumgarner can hit as well.
Yeah.
This is I mean, look, his career batting average is 185. But, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but that, honestly, I know for a fact, stacks up pretty well against league average.
You don't
pitcher
expect
hitting.
your pitchers to hit 300. That's not what they're supposed to do at this level.
And look, I mean, I said Bumgarner was poor the last couple of years. That's because he didn't pitch. I mean, he pitched 112 innings in 2017 and 130 last season. So he was unhealthy, but still, his numbers were fine even in those 2 seasons. So he just didn't have a big sample size. But look at the strikeouts to walks. Last year, 110 versus 43 strikeouts to walks. That's good. The year before, 101 to 20. That's fantastic. So either A was good for a middle-of-the-rotation starter, not necessarily up to his standards in a small sample size. So this is absolutely – he's still a must-see event.
Oh,
Even
absolutely.
if you want to say the Giants aren't very good this year and aren't really a team to watch, this is a guy to watch.
Totally. And you talk about how maybe the Cubs could put it together. There's a 4-year stretch here from 2013 to 2016 that Madison Bumgarner made the All-Star game every year, and he was top 10 voting in Cy Young every year.
Yep.
And there were 2 World Series championships in that span. He could put it together. If he stays healthy, it's definitely a player to watch.
Absolutely.
And if you want to talk about experience, let's talk about someone who has pretty much no experience. And the San Diego Padres finally calling up Fernando Tatis and also making a pretty big deal that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, surprisingly enough.
And getting Manny Machado. So the Padres are an intriguing situation to me, and I know that right after Machado signed, I had a couple back and forths with some people on Twitter, and Tim and I have talked about it a bunch as well. I still think in this division, it's going to be tough, but they're second right now. They're 11-9, and they've played some good teams. The other thing to watch with that team is their starting pitching, and Tim, you're going to have to pronounce these 2 names for me. I can't do it.
They're decent for something, I guess.
Okay, yes. So, Joey Lucchesi and Nick
Marchevicius, I think.
Margavicius.
We had it up.
We listened to it earlier. They've both been really good, and I didn't know who they were before this year started. You know, they've been a solid team so far. Very fun to watch. Manuel Margot. Hunter Renfroe hasn't gotten that much playing time, but he's been okay. What else? Will Myers, and of course Eric Hosmer. They've got some names on that team. Ian Kinsler is a veteran. It's definitely going to be a team to watch. I still think they're a couple years away, but Tatis is hitting .294 in his first 19 games in the league, and he's younger than us.
Yeah,
it's insane the talent in this league, and I don't want to get on a soapbox here and talk about that, but. Tim, how many years do you think until the Padres can squeak into a wild card or maybe even win this division?
Well, hopefully within a couple, right? Because of how Machado's deal is structured. But to answer your question, I still think it's a couple of years away as well. And the good news is most of this core is still fairly young. Now, at this point, Eric Hosmer is 29, and he's kind of the veteran of the crew. He's obviously Ian Kinsler is a little bit older than that as well, but he's not expected, I don't think, to really be around all that long.
I would have thought Hosmer was older.
He seems like he would be older, right? And then Kinsler a little bit older than that at 36, so quite a bit older than that because he was around for even before those 2 Rangers World Series runner-ups teams. Yeah. Elvis Andrus is the only holdover from those teams as well, incidentally. Wow. He's the only guy left. That wasn't all that long ago.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I think the good news is, like we said, that the rest of the core, if you will, is pretty young with Renfro, Margot, and now Tatis below 20 years old, and some other guys coming up very soon. So yeah, I mean the top of the order, which was what was kind of talked about once the Machado deal was finalized, 1 through 6, they look pretty good. And I think people kind of
Yeah.
forgot about Hunter Renfro in that mix, so I added the 6. So people were saying one
Okay.
through 5, they look good. I think 1 through 6, they look pretty good, but then you have to kind of balance it out. You have to find a catcher that can give you more than what Austin Hedges usually gives you, I
Right.
think. So Franmil Reyes is not a catcher, but he's been trending a little bit. He's only hitting 212, so it's still again young season, but they have a few other places to work out, and the pitchers fun to pronounce, difficult to pronounce, but question marks there. But their bullpen has been solid so far. I think Max, another guy that people don't pay attention to. You remember Craig Stammen from a few years ago? He's been pretty
Yeah.
good so far for them. But the guy that came on all of last season that nobody talked about at all, Kirby Yates. He's a native of Hawaii, a former middle reliever type of guy, but he was so good for the Padres last year. One of the best late inning guys. Didn't end up being a closer until late in the season, but converted 12 saves out of 13 chances. This year, he's 9 of 9. Only
Wow.
pitched 10 total innings in 10 total games, so this is his role. He's the closer this year, and he's the reason, in my opinion, that they've been so solid. Yeah, Lucchesi has been decent as a starting pitcher. Looking at Chris Paddock, he's been all right. Eric Lauer has been all right. But Kirby Yates, I think, is the best closer that people have never heard of. And a friend of mine who is a big baseball fan threw this out at me a couple of days ago. He's like, who the heck is Kirby Yates? Why is he close to the major league lead in saves? I was like, well, if you'd been paying attention to me and listened to me talk about the Durham Bulls for the past couple of years, then you would have known because he was a middle innings guy, lockdown guy for them a long time ago. The Rays didn't really necessarily need him, and so he's now found a home with the Padres, and I hope he sticks around. He's been great. I think if you're looking for fantasy baseball advice, Max is the better guy to give you the specific updates, but you need a closer. Kirby Yates is your guy.
And side note here, for those of you that listen to our pod and watch our videos moving forward, you're going to get a lot of Durham Bulls references, and you got to grow accustomed to loving and appreciating them because Tim has been a fan for years.
And I'll do my best to spread it around the rest of the minor leagues as well, I promise.
And you mentioned the name Chris Paddock. He has in 4 starts, a 2.25 ERA and a 9.5 strikeouts per 9.
Yeah.
So obviously a small sample size, but he's really been a highly touted guy going into this season as well. The last team in this division, which we can give a quick note to, is Colorado. And interestingly enough, they are at the bottom of the division right now, currently 7-12 with a minus 19 run differential, which is interesting. Maybe they haven't played that many games at Coors yet, but you talk about a nice 1 through 6. Their lineup and their talent. I mean, they made the playoffs last year, so let's give them the credit where credit's due.
Sure.
But I really still think that they are meant to be at the top of this division for another couple years. They inked up Arenado. They obviously lost LeMahieu in the offseason, but they signed Daniel Murphy, who has a lot of experience. But in terms of the young guys that have a lot of talent, you got to look at David Dahl. Raimel Tapia is so quick. Trevor Story, he could be a 40-plus home run guy.
Sure.
Mark Reynolds is a veteran. Ian Desmond could put together a 20-25 homer season. Their lineup 1 through, I could even give them 7. Their catching has been, I guess, a little bit of a weak spot with Iannetta and Wolters splitting time, but that's definitely a team with Coors Field working to their advantage that they could put up 7 runs on an ace and you won't even expect it and it'll just happen. They're obviously a lot different than what you saw with the Matt Holliday days and the Ubaldo Jimenez days. You mentioned that name earlier. But their pitching staff is also really fun to watch. Herman Marquez, talk about fantasy, he's the ace of my team right now. And let's look at his stats. That'll be good to point out. He's 2-1 so far with a 2 ERA in 4 starts, 27 innings, 25 Ks. I don't know how many of those were at Coors, but he's been really good. He's the kind of guy that can win you a wild card game. So, despite the fact that they're all the way at the bottom in that division, Tim, do you still think that they're going to end up at the top? You mentioned that the records are very telling early on. Maybe they're just in a April slump. What do you think?
I think this is really one of the few instances where you can say that the record maybe doesn't tell you the whole story. But I guess, again, we've talked about this for some other teams. I think the question is, can they actually get good pitching from other people? I think John Gray is still a solid guy, and German Marquez has been great. He was good all last year as well. They have a top-of-the-rotation guy now, and they just need to find some other people. But, yeah, the lineup, good mix of young guys, good mix of veterans. I think the loss of LeMahieu was bigger than people realize. Another table setter to work with Charlie Blackmon. They usually hit somewhere around each other, and then you throw in Arenado right after that. That's a really, really good 1, 2, 3 in some order. So I think the loss of LeMahieu is big, but obviously that freed them up some cap space to give Arenado the contract he deserves.
Yeah. As I was saying, they're talented young guys. They're talented guys in general. Somehow I didn't say Charlie Blackmon's name, so that's on me. I think that they'll be able to put it together as well. And I mean, my early, very lukewarm take is that they'll make the wild card game. I think that the Dodgers are still a force to be reckoned with in that division, and San Diego will probably cool off a little bit, but it might end up being a closer division than we think. Maybe the Giants go all in. Maybe they got Pilar and they start to make some deals, but everybody's kind of in striking distance early on.
Yeah, I think the way you have to look at it, we can you can talk about this for the AL as well, and it'll be a good segue into our last division. But there are so few teams that actually do make the playoffs. So you have the division winner and then 2 wild cards, right? That's all you got. So I think there's every chance that maybe even those 2 wild card spots maybe go to teams from the Central. If Milwaukee wins the division, let's say, then St. Louis should be good enough to contend for the division. So they're going to finish just short. In this situation, they would have to be in the wild card.
Right.
And so then maybe some other team from that division sneaks in. If that happens, and I don't know that it does, but if it does, then if the Dodgers win this division like everybody expects they do, then there's no place for the Rockies.
Right.
So a lot will end up with how good the rest of the other divisions are. And we haven't even talked about, I think, the closest division. I think the Central is probably the most top-heavy with the Brewers and the Cardinals, but the closest division probably, if last year was anything to go by, is the NL East. I mean, the Braves are the reigning champions, and a lot was expected from them. You want to talk about a young core, that's everything you want in a young core right there.
Absolutely.
And I promised other minor league updates. This was a minor league powerhouse that couldn't actually get the results because they had the young core that you see now on offense for about 2 years, but the rest of the pitching didn't work out. Now they've got the pitching, and their offense just really isn't there. So in AAA, they weren't really able to mix those two together, and then some other teams in the division were just better. But now they've got those guys in the major leagues, which is awesome, and they are really fun to watch. Yeah. You throw in these young guys like Albies and Acuna, and even a guy like Dansby Swanson into the mix with a holdover like Freddie Freeman, an MVP candidate. You've got yourself a really good division contending team. But then, obviously, the other major storyline from the offseason was what the Phillies did.
Right, that's the big question. Can Atlanta defend their division title when the Phillies made so many big deals this offseason? And the Nationals, they got Patrick Corbin, but the Phillies definitely stole the show. They got Harper, they got JT Realmuto, they got Andrew McCutchen, they got Gene Segura, they got David Robertson, which hasn't exactly panned out for them so far. But on paper, a lot of, pedestrian baseball fans would think that they're going to run away with this division, but in reality, it's probably going to be really close.
It's a fair prediction. Yeah.
That's how stacked the National League is. The fact that in your scenario that you just talked about, all 3 playoff teams could come from one division.
Sure.
Two teams could come from the West. All 3 could come from the East. There's really no way to know, and it's going to be so much fun to watch. The Phillies, throughout their lineup, are just so solid and so dangerous. Rhys Hoskins, a lot of people don't know about him, but he has the potential to 40 home runs, 50 home runs.
I think 40 home runs very much so.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's flashed this at all levels. This is not a guy that just burst out last year if you were following the team a little bit when they were just average. This is a guy that has flashed this for years. He has very much the power potential. So yeah, I mean, I think 40 home runs at some point in his career is very much a safe bet.
So what else with this team? They get Bryce Harper, and
34 last year in his first full year in the majors. So I mean, if
for Hoskins,
if he's a career 30+ home run guy with Harper in the mix now, I mean, adding a table setter like Gene Segura and now another extra base guy like Real Muto in the mix as well, that's a really good team.
That's the big thing, that Harper's a lefty, Hoskins is a righty. Franco's a righty, Segura's a righty, but then Odubel Herrera is a lefty. I think their lineup is really balanced.
Yeah, that helps.
Gene Segura's hit 300 since we were in the womb, it seems like. He lives above 300. In 18 games so far, Bryce Harper is hitting 250. But in a environment which was kind of like a playoff atmosphere when he returned back to Washington, he did well. A 3-hit game, a couple home runs. He obviously has a lot of experience and has kind of had some off years in the past, but his ceiling is so high. Same with JT Realmuto. A lot of people thought that he could conceivably be the MVP this year, judging by the fact that Stanton leaves Miami and he's an MVP, or Stanton was an MVP there, and Yelich leaves Miami and he's an MVP.
Makes sense, right?
So either Ozuna or Realmuto will win the MVP this year. You heard it here first. But yeah, this is such a dangerous offense, and their pitching staff is not too shabby either, Tim. I mean, Aaron Nola is so good.
Yes, this is a guy that I've been excited for years. A couple of other AAA starters, Nola, Jameson Taillon for Pittsburgh, and Tyler Glasnow used to be on Pittsburgh. These were guys that carved the trip to the International League up, and some guys that are now on the White Sox that I got to see quite a lot. These are fun guys. So I'm talking about Carson Fulmer, for example. We'll talk about him on another show. But Aaron Nola is a legitimate pitching star in the major leagues, and he was so good last year. Deserved to be a Cy Young finalist. I'm expecting to see even more out of him the next couple of seasons.
Arrieta.
Oh, can't. And he, obviously, of course, saying this, Nola's not been off to a very good start this season. But I think what you saw from him last year is going to be more in line with what he does with his career.
Eflin is a good starter.
Yep.
Their bullpen has a lot of guys who've been there before and a lot of guys who are young and have star power with Sir Anthony Dominguez and Velasquez and Pat Neshek.
Jared Eichhoff can get healthy as well. This is your flamethrower. I saw him pitch for the Rangers a little while ago, but this is a guy that touches 97 consistently. So that's another. He's only pitched in one game this year, but if he's available, there's another option.
Right. And so we'll transition from their bullpen to another bullpen that's now a lot better, the Mets. The Mets are an interesting situation because DeGrom won the Cy Young with absolutely no run support. And so they go out and they get Cano. They get Diaz too. That's why I had the bullpen segue. They get Wilson Ramos. They get some other guys. Cespedes maybe potentially going to be healthy soon, but who knows. McNeil has burst onto the scene. But really, their biggest guy that's been catching all the highlights is Peter Alonso. And he's also probably younger than us. I mean, he's so young. 24. Never mind. I'm not 24 yet. How many home runs does he have so far, Tim? 6 in 18 games.
Yeah.
And
sitting 323, slugging over 700. I mean,
he's got to be the early Rookie of the Year candidate in the NL. He's really anchored that lineup, and I mean their run differential was currently in the red, while all the other teams at the top of their division are in the green. Yep. And then of course the Marlins are minus 49,
which is nuts,
with the league worst 2.53 runs per game. But the Mets are a team that if they got hot, they have the pitching and they have the bullpen now to win some games down the stretch. I don't know if their offense is good enough to do so. I mean, guys like Dominic Smith. Tim just clicked on Dominic Smith on his computer, but Michael Conforto and Brandon Nimmo, Juan Lagares, they're all really solid players. J.D. Davis has been getting some tick now.
These are all these young guys that we've been hearing about in the Mets system for a long time that are
Yeah.
now finally getting full-time chances to play because, you hate to say it, but some of the veterans that have been around the team aren't there anymore. So David Wright is gone, so J.D. Davis now gets to play every day at third base. They had Jay Bruce, he's not there anymore, so now you get to see more from Brandon Nimmo. It's that, and Kean Broxton comes in as well. He wasn't a prospect, but another younger guy. So this is now finally an exciting time on offense for the Mets. You already mentioned Alonso, McNeil in there as well. These are high-end AAA producers that now finally get their chance in the big leagues.
Right. You talk about a pitching staff that if they stay healthy, they've got to be one of the best in the bigs.
I mean, safely. I mean, you've got two names really there, and that's all you need.
Right, but not even the two names, the 1 through 4. You can't forget about Zach Wheeler, and you can't forget about Steven Matz.
If they stay healthy, absolutely. Now, Jason Vargas has been bad this year, which isn't a surprise to me, to be honest. But, yeah, I mean, my point was that even if you have two other league average starters in that mix, if you have Syndergaard and DeGrom in one order, they can give you anywhere near what they usually do. It's a lethal rotation just with two guys.
And I'm just thinking about this, but imagine if it's DeGrom, it's Syndergaard, it's Wheeler, and it's Matz, and then it's Keuchel instead of Vargas, who I don't even know why he's still in the league. He hasn't exactly been tearing it up this year, but definitely something to watch. If they can stay healthy, which we've been saying for like 5 years now, they're going to be a dangerous team. And the same goes, a little bit south in Washington, D.C. with the Nationals. And they go out and they get Patrick Corbin on that mega deal in the offseason. Max Scherzer, has been a Cy Young candidate seemingly every year for like a decade now. And if Strasburg stays healthy, which is the big question mark, that's a 1-2-3 that no offense wants to see heading into a playoff series. I know they never ended up actually winning a playoff series while Harper was there, but maybe an addition by subtraction, maybe getting that whole ordeal away from their city, not too far, obviously, logistically, because now Harper's still in the division, but their offense has a lot of star power. Rendon, people don't think about Anthony Rendon, but he's one of the best hitters in the game. And he could potentially win an MVP this year. Right now, he's hitting .379 in 17 games, 18 RBIs and 6 homers. He lives in the gap, just constantly hitting line drives. And if Trey Turner gets healthy, if Adam Eaton is healthy, their top of their lineup is really good. Sure. And talk about minor leagues. What about Juan Soto?
Juan Soto and Victor Robles are now both up full time, pretty much, and And Robles has been, honestly, he was kind of the more heralded guy ahead of Soto for a little while. He was, the top of the list prospect in the outfield for the Nationals. But, I mean, look at what Soto did last year. One of the best rookie seasons in recent history just in terms of power and overall extra bases. So you mix those two guys in. The loss of Bryce Harper, he honestly wasn't even great for the Nationals last season. And we're being a little tough on him because he's a star. But I think most people, when they've said, Harper wasn't really good for the Nationals recently, you expect him to be an MVP type candidate, and he wasn't. So therefore, he's not great, even though he's still very good. But you throw in a guy like Soto and Robles with an outfield with Adam Eaton.
Yeah.
All right.
Michael A. Taylor.
Fast guy when he's around. Sure.
Absolutely.
And the pitching staff, you were bigger on the Corbin signing than I was, but if he can give you a number two, if he's your number 2 behind Scherzer, and you can manage Strasburg a little bit, you're in great shape. Then look who else they've brought in this year. Jeremy Hellickson is back, a veteran now at this point in his career. He's been great. And then Anibal Sanchez, who has been in the minors the last couple of years. I saw him in AAA last year, and he got rocked every time that I saw him with the Braves minor league team. He was not good. But now he's been solid. He's been okay for the Nationals this year. If that's your number 5,
that's all you need out of
That's
5.
all you need.
Yeah. And Sean Doolittle at the end of their bullpen.
Absolutely.
Kyle Barraclough, who I saw a lot in Miami last year, he has some upside.
That's a good one, too.
It's a really good team, Tim. And I think that a lot of people, when they saw what the Phillies did and what they saw what the Braves have done last year, they look right past the Nationals.
Sure.
But, we were trying to hypothesize certain playoff situations, which we won't do. It's way too early to tell.
Much too early.
But I'd say that there's 3, maybe 4 teams in the East, 3 definitely 3 teams in the Central and 2, maybe 3 teams in the West that are all playoff material.
Yeah.
And
not many spots for them.
Not enough spots. But that's just the way it is. And it's going to be so much fun to watch the National League for the rest of this season. So with that, we're going to say goodbye to you on our first edition of Good Hacks. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll get back to you soon with this same kind of ordeal, but for the American League. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. See you next time.